It's a real pleasure to be here, and I just want to say thank you to the School Improvement Network because it's truly an honor to have your work featured and end up on PD 360 and shared nationally, and it's been a real pleasure for everyone at Blue Ribbon to have some time to think about what we do in front of the camera, because in that setting you really have to put your actions together with your beliefs and be able to express it. Today I want to talk not about how we do what we do, but what's more important, which is what we learn from our students. And so on the screen you're going to see one of our students. Her name is Maria. And this is a self-portrait from an arts education component of our program, where our students are working with professional artists and arts educators to look on their own racial identity. And in these portraits, the students are asked to pose themselves in a way that they think is how the outside world perceives them, but then to create these thought bubbles of how they think about their own racial identity. And so if you look at Maria's first bubble, you'll see it says, "No matter where I go, you're always on my mind. No importa a donde estoy es en mi mente." Mexican pride. A very clear sense of racial identity, of where she's come from. The you in this statement is not a person, it's a country, it's a culture, it's a heritage. A real sense of strength. Her second thought bubble is not the same sentiment. Fear is such a weak emotion, and until you face your fears, it will be an extra weight on my back, holding me back. Now, I want to read this to you again because I want you to pay attention to how the pronouns shift. Fear is such a weak emotion, and until you face your fears, it will be an extra weight on my back, holding me back. Fear is often thought of as a very strong emotion. Maria turns that on its reverse. We think about fear paralyzing people, but she's talking about what happens when people are afraid of you, and the weight that gets put on you when that fear is directed towards you. If you take the word fear out and you substitute racism or oppression or any other similar word, I think that this seventh grader has given us the best definition of oppression that we may have ever seen. And yet, when I looked at Maria's photograph and I thought about who she is, I thought, who's afraid of her? Why is she carrying this fear? This is a young woman who started in our program in 4th grade as an ESL student, very meek and timid, and by the time she finished 8th grade this year, this is her final report card. That's amazing. Why would anyone be afraid of Maria? Why would she be carrying that if she's exactly the type of student we want to see who progresses to being a straight-A student? But if I connect the dots between the two bubbles, I can probably help you understand where the fear comes from. Maria is an undocumented immigrant. At home, Maria's parents, who moved here from Mexico when she was only 3 years old, teach her regularly about the importance of their cultural heritage and help her keep connected to the country that is their native country. For two reasons. One is it's where their strength comes from as a family, their values. But secondly, because as undocumented immigrants, they know that at any point in time they could be forced to return to Mexico. And Maria, although she is as American as any other student in our schools, needs to be prepared for that eventuality. The fear is the weight of being someone who is feared by an entire nation. And so when I thought about her, the fear of being undocumented, I thought, well, she's not talking about me. She's talking about the government and the police and maybe some of her teachers, but they probably like her, but she's not talking about me. I really want to think about myself as the good white guy, the guy who helps all these poor black and brown kids to be successful. She can't think that I have any fear of her. But at the end of this week where we do this art camp with these students, we do a performance. The students do a 12 to 15-minute performance that includes their photographs, some poetry, some theatrical scenes. It's all about their identities. And afterwards, Maria came up to me, and she was crying. And she said, "I want to tell you thank you." And I said, "Oh, Maria, no problem. It's great. You did a phenomenal job. It was a wonderful week." She says, "No, I want to tell you thank you because I never believed you before." I said, "What do you mean? What didn't you believe?" She said, "You've been telling me since I was in 4th grade that I'm going to go to college, and until this week, I never thought that it was true." And the reason why was that she didn't know that I knew that she was undocumented, and she thought that that meant that she couldn't go to college. But during that week, we had a conversation about that as a piece of identity, and she was able to talk about being undocumented and move to the place of being undocumented and unafraid. And then I was able to tell her, "Yes, Maria, we help our undocumented students go to college too." But for so long, it had been my fears on her back. If you look at Maria in the eyes, she is not a threatening person. I have no reason to be afraid of her, but when I show myself for the same week and the same set of portraits, I recognize that I do in fact have these fears, that fear that she identified for me, the fear of being able to tell a 4th grader, "I don't care what your status is, I'm still going to help you go to college." The fear of not being able to speak well enough to her parents to explain that, or not knowing whether she could emotionally handle it, when in fact she was emotionally carrying my baggage for 4 years. When you strip away the background from any of us, we all have fears. And Maria tells us that it is our fears of our own students that is the weight on their back. I want to lift those weights for my students. I want to see this self-portrait that Maria created, where she said, "I want to create a self-portrait where I can fly." And so at Blue Ribbon, and working with our students, we've learned some keys to helping them lift that weight. What do? The first thing is that we are a student-centered program. You heard in the video that everything we do is strengths-based. We do not focus on the negatives or the impediments to students being successful. We work with them and their families to identify what strengths they can bring to the situation. We also try to be conscious of making every decision of how we run our program and what we do for the students based on their needs, and not letting our own needs, the adults' wishes and desires, to get in the way of them. We pay attention to what it is the students and the families have to say to us. And this creates a great deal of success. Students who are able to fly. We put together a whole set of components of activities that we do to develop the students' strengths, and we start out in 4th grade, the very first day that they meet us, telling them, 8 years from now, you're going to go to college. In fact, we believe so strongly you're going to go to college that we're telling you today we're going to give you a scholarship when you graduate. Trying to lift the weight. We also build on what we call longitudinal trust. We start students in 4th grade, and we work with them from 4th grade all the way through high school, through our scholarship component. We help them, I messed up my own slide. We help them go all the way through college with a scholarship. We even hire back our college students to come and work on our summer camp staffs. Trust is the cornerstone of all human relationships, mentoring relationships and all relationships. If you look at any parent who brings their kindergartner to school on the first day, they are placing their trust in the school, that the school will educate their child, will keep their child safe, and will help their child develop an identity in the long run. But by the time the kids reach us in just 4th grade, too many parents feel that the school has already broken their trust. And so Blue Ribbon stands as a mediator to follow that student from elementary to middle to high school like no one else does, and maintain that trust with that parent, that family, and the child, that we're going to help them be successful in the long run. We will stand for them in schools. And when you have to stand for students of colors in school, it requires you to be anti-racist. And we make that a core part of our ideology. We focus on supporting students' racial identity development as a way for them to develop the strength that they need to succeed in a society where institutionalized racism is a barrier every day of their lives. But we also work on attacking the institutionalized racism itself through systemic advocacy. I want to show you a couple examples of the theoretical model that we use behind this, because it really matters to know what you're talking about when you bring up race. People in administration and funders and things don't necessarily think about these, and it gets threatening. So we use research. Mary Stone Hanley and George Noblet have created this great study where they looked at all the research on what creates high achievement for students of color. And so they looked at the students and they said, all right, in the research it shows these 3 things matter. They all impact achievement. Well, all mentoring programs like Blue Ribbon are built on resilience. Culturally responsive pedagogy is important in schools, but we're also trying to create culturally responsive mentoring. And then they introduced this concept around positive racial identity development that we hadn't spent a whole lot of time on. We said, well, how can we add that into our component? And the research also showed that it was the pedagogy that reinforced those things. And we said, all right, well, what kind of pedagogy can we use to support those positive racial identities for our students? And the research is clear. It's arts education. And if there's any arts educators in the room, I know how happy you are to hear finally somebody says this matters. But the research is very clear that the arts matter strongly to creating students of color who can be successful in school. And so we use that in our programming. We also worked with our students to have them teach us how to teach teachers. And so Bonnie Davis, who you're going to hear from in a couple of minutes, and Dorothy Kelly, who's here, worked with me and the School Improvement Network to develop a model to focus on this. Now, we know that high expectations matter, and we know that curriculum and pedagogy matter. But the foundation is the relationships that you build with your students and how you connect with them. And we call this our Student 6, and this will be in a video that will come out from School Improvement Network at some point later this year. And the students, we taught them 17 culturally proficient teaching strategies. It took us about 30 minutes to teach them these strategies, not a whole year it might take in a graduate school course. They got it very quickly. And then we had them tell us which 6 matter the most. And if you put these in a narrative, it goes like this. Students of color want to be seen and acknowledged. They want to feel close to their teachers, not just emotionally, but physically. It helps reduce the feeling that they may be threatening to their teachers. It helps build learning because it activates brain connections. They want teachers to connect what's happening in their classrooms to their larger lives, including acknowledging the way that their culture is positive and can be used in their learning. And they want you to address race, acknowledge that racism is a challenge for students of color, but also that race is part of their strength. They want to talk about that in the classroom. And then they want to know, how are you going to help me on my path connecting to the larger world? What is it from this class that's going to help me get where I want to go? If you can build those 6 things in, you end up with a student with a strong racial identity and a classroom that's supportive to students of color and all other students, I would say. But I don't want you to think that this is a paradigm that creates easy successes, because the other result, besides having lots of students be successful, is we create a lot of internal tension in our school district. The challenge is that we are always student-centered. And school districts, schools, and organizations are not always student-centered. There are many decisions that are made in schools that are made for the convenience and comfort of adults. So we try to have our internal tension be productive, to be tension that is both collegial and productive for the students. And so let me give you an example of how we do this. On the other side of the spectrum from Maria is a student named Shaquille. Shaquille is a 7th grade African-American male, and like his more famous namesake, he is a very large young man. Shaquille has struggled in school the entire way through, and by the time he was in 7th grade, he had learned that a very convenient way to avoid the struggles in school was to bully students and to bully teachers. Now, I have a hard time understanding why teachers are intimidated by 7th grade boys, but they were. The teachers in his middle school were so intimidated by Shaquille that they convinced the principal to put him on a reduced schedule where he was only coming to school 2 classes a day. And you can guess which 2 classes they are: math and language arts. And so the social worker from the school called me after this went on for about a week, and she realized it wasn't temporary, that this was going to be his course of study for the remainder of the school year. And she said, "You need to know this is happening with one of your students." And I said, "Well, that's ridiculous," and I didn't quite know what to do about it. But later that day, I was in a meeting with the administration from the school district, and the superintendent was there, and I snagged him afterwards, and I said, if I explained the situation, I said, "If that happened, is that permissible?" And he said, "No, in fact, that sounds illegal." And I said, "Well, it's happening to one of our students. What should I do?" And he said, "Well, why don't you call the principal and ask her when this is going to end and when she can get him back in full time, and if that doesn't work, let me know." Well, that didn't work. Because when we advocate for students in the face of adult choices in schools, the same thing always happens. The adults tell us that it's either none of our business, or it's in the student's best interest, or it's the only way that things can be done. And none of those 3 things are true. And so I went back to the superintendent, and he connected me with the assistant superintendent, and she informed the principal that this young man needed to be back in school on Monday. And so I told his grandmother, and I said, he's going to be back on Monday. There's going to be this reentry meeting. You'll need to go in. I said, you have the right to appeal when something like this happens. And in fact, you have the right to appeal with help. You don't have to go to this meeting alone. You can take me or someone from Blue Ribbon. We can bring his mentor, or you can bring, someone from the community that you trust. You can bring anyone you want. So when Monday morning rolls around, we get to the middle school, and I'm in the room, and the teachers are in the room, the principal is there, and the grandmother walks in, and she has with her the chair of our local NAACP. The stakes just got a little higher. And I'm like, go on, Grandma. You do that. You take that advice and you run with that. But the principal tried to one-up us. She called in the school resource officer. And he brought his laptop computer, and he showed us a picture of Shaquille holding a gun from his Facebook page. Now, in no way do I want Shaquille to have a gun. But when the principal said we're going to suspend him for 10 days because of this picture, I had to ask exactly what policy is he breaking? Because I'm pretty sure there's no district policy that says you can't hold a gun on a Facebook page. We just haven't gotten that specific yet. And so we got in a little disagreement about this, and I said, let us handle the gun issue. We're the mentors. You need to handle the education issue. The assistant superintendent informed me that he was to be back in school this morning, and you're telling me that he's not. Has this been cleared with the assistant superintendent? And she said, no, but he's not coming back in my school. So the NAACP president stepped in as things got a little heated between these two school district administrators, and he said, well, I'm very close with the assistant superintendent, so we'll go downtown and we'll see what she has to say about this. Shaquille was back in school the next day. Shaquille needs mentoring. Shaquille also needs a full education. It's the job of Blue Ribbon to think about how we do this work, and sometimes to face it head on, to stand up and not be afraid to say for even one of the most challenging students, he needs every opportunity. He needs to be in class. I want you to look at Maria again. I want you to look right at her eyes and think about if she were one of your students. And I want you to think about her quote about fear is such a weak emotion. And until you face your fears, it will be an extra weight on my back, holding me back. Educators, what are your fears? What fears do you hold of your own students? We have to encounter our fears. I need you to name your fears so that you start to lift the weight off the back of your student. I would like to count to 3, and when I finish, I would like you to out loud name at least one of your fears that you can lift off of your students' backs. 1, 2, 3. You guys are afraid to name your own fears. That was like a mumble. If you're afraid of flying, and I'm flying with you to this conference, and I say, you don't have to be afraid. There's nothing I can do to take that fear away from you. You either have to encounter that fear and get on the plane, or you have to avoid flying. But you cannot avoid your students. So I want to try it again. Don't be afraid. Name your fear so that you can encounter it and move past it. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. I want you to leave here thinking about your Marias and your Shaquilles. I want you to think about their potential, your fears, what you can do to lift the weight from their back so that every single one of them gets every opportunity they need to be successful. Good luck.